My name is Margaret Dunn. And on the day my grandson turned 20, I realized I didn't exist anymore. Not to my family. At least, the text came in at 3:30 on a Tuesday afternoon while I was folding David's laundry. The same way I'd been doing it for years. It said, "Clean up. We'll be back late with guests. Thanks." I stared at that message for 5 minutes before it really sank in. Guests. That meant my own family. My son David, his wife Vanessa, and my grandson Liam were heading out to celebrate his birthday without me. I wasn't invited, but apparently, I was still expected to tidy up afterward. That's when it hit me this wasn't my home anymore. I looked around the basement room I'd been sleeping in for the past 2 years. It used to be a guest room. Then it became mine when Vanessa's mother started visiting for weeks at a time. My photos were gone from the living room, replaced by her abstract art. My rose garden outside had been ripped out and filled with polished stones, Vanessa said. Roses were too much maintenance. I suppose that was her polite way of describing me, too. I thought about all the birthdays I'd planned for Liam over the years, the cakes I'd baked, the decorations, the laughter that once filled this house. Now there was nothing left but quiet and the faint scent of Vanessa's vanilla candles upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed, my folded laundry stacked neatly beside me, and tried to swallow the ache in my throat. That was the moment I knew something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't a mother in this house anymore. I was the help. And that text, the casual dismissal wrapped in manners, was the final confirmation. When you live in someone else's house long enough, you start to fade into the walls. That's what happened to me. 8 years of doing dishes, folding clothes, and pretending not to notice that every trace of me was quietly removed. The family photos that once showed Robert, my late husband, and me on vacations were replaced with Vanessa's curated displays, her parents, her college friends, her perfect family. The living room no longer smelled like lemon polish and fresh flowers. Now it reeked of vanilla candles and expensive perfume. Even the furniture had changed. My sturdy oak table and warm-toned sofa were banished to the basement, while Vanessa's white couches took their place. Spotless and untouchable, like the people who sat on them. Upstairs, I could hear the faint echo of their laughter as they left for the restaurant. My son, his wife, my grandson. They didn't look back. They never did anymore. I watched through the narrow basement window as their headlights disappeared. And that was when I made my decision. If they wanted me invisible, I would give them what they wanted. Completely. I opened my small dresser and began packing. Years of living in one room had made me efficient. 2 suitcases for my clothes. 1 box for photo albums and jewelry that belonged to my mother and grandmother. I handled each item carefully. Not because I was sentimental, but because these were the few things no one had taken from me yet. Then I found the old box of Robert's things, the watch he wore every day, his reading glasses, his woodworking journal. He'd been methodical, steady, always planning ahead. I could almost hear his voice in my head, about time. Margaret. That thought made me smile for the first time in weeks. Benyene o'clock. Everything that mattered was in the trunk of my car. The rest, the furniture they didn't want, the decorations I wasn't allowed to use, could stay. I left a note on the kitchen table. Next to the salt shaker, Robert carved years ago. The cleaning is done. Don't worry about me. I'm exactly where I need to be. I signed it simply Margaret. Then I turned off the lights, locked the doors, and walked out of the house I'd built, paid for, and been erased from. This time, I didn't look back. The highway was almost empty when I crossed the state line. For the first time in years, I didn't have to rush home, answer to anyone, Or plan a meal for people who forgot to include me? The radio played soft jazz, and the sound filled the silence that had always surrounded me in that basement. I didn't know where I was headed, only that I was finally driving towards something that felt like freedom. By 3 in the morning, exhaustion forced me to pull into a truck stop outside Cincinnati. The parking lot glowed under fluorescent lights, filled with semis and tired travelers grabbing coffee. I walked inside, invisible among strangers, and realized that invisibility felt different when it was my choice. It was almost peaceful. The young man at the counter smiled as he handed me a cup of black coffee and said, "Drive safe." "Mom, crazy night to be out alone." I told him, "Sometimes crazy is exactly what you need." His kindness, so simple and without expectation, reminded me what it felt like to be seen as a person, not a burden. I sat at a small corner table and watched the night shift world move around me. That's when I noticed the woman at the next table. She looked to be about my age. Silver hair pulled back neatly, reading a paperback while sipping tea. When she glanced up, our eyes met, and she smiled like she understood everything without a word. Her name was June Parker, a retired attorney driving back to Louisville after visiting her daughter. She said quietly, "The hardest part isn't leaving. It's forgiving yourself for waiting so long." We talked until dawn, two women rediscovering what life looked like beyond everyone else's expectations. June gave me her number and told me to call if I needed anything. But mostly, she gave me courage. By sunrise, I had a plan. I would open my own bank account, rent my own place, and start my life on my terms. For the first time in 8 years, I wasn't somebody's mother or grandmother. I was just Margaret Dunn. And that felt like the truest version of me. When Vanessa Dunn called to invite me to dinner, her voice carried the careful sweetness people use when they're trying to fix something they broke, but don't understand how. She said it would be just family. No expectations. No agenda. I agreed. But only under my terms. I would drive myself, and I would leave when I was ready. That simple boundary already felt like a quiet victory. When I arrived at the house, the air smelled faintly of burnt sauce. David opened the door, wearing an apron that looked brand new, his expression a mix of relief and panic. From the kitchen, I could hear Vanessa muttering under her breath and the distinct sound of a pot boiling over. Every instinct in me wanted to walk in and take control. But I stayed in the doorway and waited. Vanessa's dinner was unraveling fast. The roast was overcooked, the sauce separated, and she was close to tears. Before she could spiral further, Liam stepped in, calm and focused. He fixed the sauce with butter, rescued the roast, and turned the chaos into something edible. I watched quietly as he moved with quiet confidence skills I'd taught him years ago when he was still small enough to stand on a kitchen stool. We ate at 7:30, half an hour later than planned. The food was decent, but the conversation felt staged, like everyone was reading from a script. David asked polite questions about my apartment. Vanessa complimented my sweater as if she were practicing humility. Liam tried to fill the silences with stories from college that didn't require anyone to respond. It wasn't unpleasant, but it wasn't real. At one point, Liam looked up and said what everyone else was avoiding. "This feels weird," he admitted. I smiled and told him, "Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe we're meeting each other for the first time as adults." No one said anything after that. But something in the room shifted. For the first time, they saw me not as background, not as help, but as a person at the table, still. I could feel the fragility of it all. The politeness stretched too thin. It wasn't reconciliation, it was rehearsal. 3 weeks after that uneasy dinner, Liam Dunn showed up at my apartment unannounced, holding a manila folder like it contained something dangerous. His face was pale, his voice tight, and he didn't waste time with small talk. He said he'd been working on a business class project about family-owned companies and had gone through his father's office files for reference. What he found had shaken him. He placed the folder on my kitchen table and pushed it toward me. Inside were photocopies of mortgage papers, my address, my property description, and my son's signature, Nomine. My heart started to pound as Liam explained that David had taken out a second mortgage on my house 3 years earlier, worth $80,000. Using my home as collateral for a so-called business expansion loan. He spoke carefully, like he was afraid his words might break me. I felt the air leave my lungs. That house had been fully paid off since Robert's death. I'd made every payment myself. There had never been a reason for debt. He couldn't have done this without my consent. I said quietly, already knowing the answer. Liam looked down and said that David had used my power of attorney, the document I'd signed for emergencies, giving him access to my financial affairs. I trusted him to protect me. Instead, he'd used that trust to steal from me. The betrayal was so deep it almost felt physical. My own son had gambled my security, the home I'd built, the last piece of my independence. I turned another page and found the breakdown of the loan disbursement. Less than half went into his business. The rest paid off personal credit card debt and bought Vanessa's SUV. 8 years of treating me like hired help while living off my name and property. Liam's voice broke when he said, "I thought you should know before they find a way to hide it." His loyalty, quiet and brave, steadied me. I thanked him. But inside, something cold and sharp began to take shape. This wasn't hurt anymore, it was clarity. The next morning, I met with Linda Cho. The attorney June Parker had recommended. Linda was a composed woman in her 50s, the kind who didn't need to raise her voice to command attention. After reviewing the documents, she looked up and said evenly, "Mrs. Dunn, what your son did is called elder financial exploitation. It's illegal." I nodded, my hands steady for the first time in days. "I don't want revenge," I told her. "I want justice." Linda smiled faintly, as if she'd heard that before. "Then let's start by taking back what's yours." By Monday morning, Linda Cho had drafted a formal demand letter addressed to David Dunn. It required him to provide full documentation of all financial transactions made under my power of attorney and to repay every unauthorized dollar within 30 days. If he failed, the letter stated plainly, I would revoke the power of attorney and file a civil suit for elder financial exploitation. Linda read it aloud once more before sliding it across her desk for my signature. I signed without hesitation. The pen didn't even tremble. It wasn't anger anymore, it was focus. For the first time in years, I wasn't cleaning up my son's messes, I was documenting them. Linda said she would send the letter by certified mail that afternoon. And I left her office feeling lighter than I had in months. The call came 2 days later. Early in the morning, David's voice was tight with panic. The kind that seeps in when someone realizes their excuses have run out. He demanded to know what the letter was about, saying I was overreacting and misunderstanding how business works. When I told him calmly that it wasn't business, it was theft. There was a long silence on the line. Then came the shift, the practiced tone he used with investors and clients. He tried to sound reasonable, even wounded. He said, "Mom, you're destroying this family over money." I could almost hear Vanessa feeding him lines in the background. I answered quietly, "No, David, I'm destroying the illusion that everything was fine." The pause that followed was heavy and final. he pleaded next, promising to make payments, to refinance, to work something out. But Linda had been right. Men like David only changed when forced to. I told him the only way forward was to pay the full balance or sell the house. His voice cracked when he realized I meant it. After hanging up, I turned off my phone and sat by the window of my apartment. Outside, Lexington moved at its usual calm rhythm, people walking dogs, booze passing by, the sound of a life built on truth, not debt. My son could call it betrayal if he wanted. I called it accountability. This wasn't revenge for being forgotten at a birthday dinner. It was justice for being erased from my own life. 3 weeks later, David Dunn called again, but his voice was hollow this time. He said the house had been listed, and there was no other way to settle the debt. Linda Cho's deadline had forced his hand, and the weight of his decisions was finally visible in his tone. The man who once talked in business jargon now spoke like someone who'd lost the language of confidence. When the sale closed, the proceeds barely covered the 2 mortgages and the legal fees. After everything, only about $40,000 remained. And that money came back to me, the rightful owner. David didn't argue. He simply said, "It's done," and hung up. For years, that house had been my prison, filled with silence and obligation. Now, it was gone. And strangely, I felt nothing but relief. Liam called that night. His voice was heavy with mixed emotions, anger, shame, and grief all tangled together. He said Vanessa had been crying as she packed boxes, and David had locked himself in his office, refusing to talk. "It feels like our family's falling apart," he said softly. I told him, maybe it needed to. Some things have to break before they can be rebuilt, right? There was a long pause before Liam whispered, "You didn't deserve any of this." "Grandma," I told him he was wrong. I didn't deserve the betrayal. But I did deserve the freedom that came after it. By the time we said goodbye, he sounded steadier. I think he finally understood that losing the house wasn't punishment. It was consequence. That night, I stood by my window in Lexington, looking out at the quiet street below. For the first time in years, I was untethered. My son had lost a house, but I had gained a life. And that, I decided, was the fairest trade I'd ever made. 6 months later, I drove to Columbus for Liam Dunn's college graduation. The ceremony was long and filled with speeches about ambition and integrity. 2 words that carried new weight for both of us. When Liam walked across the stage to accept his diploma, I felt something warm and steady settle in my chest. Pride not for what he'd achieved, but for who he'd chosen to become. Afterward, he found me in the crowd. His face lit with relief when he saw I'd come. He said his parents wanted me to join them for dinner. Across the parking lot, I saw David and Vanessa standing beside a modest used car that replaced the luxury one they'd lost. They looked smaller, somehow less polished, but maybe more real. I told Liam I'd come, but I would drive myself. As always, we met at a small Italian restaurant near campus, the kind of place that didn't pretend to be fancy, over pasta and soft light. We talked like people rebuilding something from the ashes. David asked about my volunteer work at the literacy center. Vanessa complimented my calm, saying she was trying to learn it. No one apologized again, but no one made excuses either. It wasn't comfortable, but it was honest. When dinner ended, Vanessa walked me to my car. She said quietly, "Losing the house was the best thing that could have happened to us. We're learning to live within our means." Her voice trembled when she added, "I hope someday you'll want to be part of our lives again, the real version this time." I told her. Maybe. Let's see what kind of people you become. Driving back to Lexington, the city lights blurred in the rain. For the first time, I didn't feel bitterness or loss. Just peace and the quiet satisfaction of knowing my boundaries had finally held. Thank you for watching until the very end. If this story spoke to you, please subscribe so you never miss what comes next. And if you carry a story of your own, I invite you to share it in the comments. Your voice matters here. Always.